This is episode 46 of the Why Not Me podcast, Holiday Trauma. I'm your host, Danita Bremer. I'm a wife, mom, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a life coach. And I believe when you know who you are, you can be the best at what you're called to do. This requires faith, wisdom, and mental wellness. That's what we talk about here. Okay, my lovely audience. As you probably know, this episode is not coming out on a Monday morning. I normally drop them at 5 a.m. on Monday morning, and I just have not been feeling it. I have been in the throes of what I'm calling holiday trauma. And I'm on purposely using the word trauma because I want to educate the world about what trauma is and my experience of it. If you've listened to me at all, you know that I talk a lot about my experiences and my own stories. And this still feels very raw and unresolved, unprocessed in many ways, although it has been a couple of weeks. So I just wasn't feeling the podcast. Usually I kind of take the week to figure out what I want to talk about, if I feel pulled in a specific direction, and I just wasn't feeling anything really called to me. And that's just kind of how I operate, is really a lot out of intuition here on the podcast, really in general in my life as well. And then what happened was I normally record on a Thursday or Friday afternoon, but last week was Thanksgiving. So I already wasn't quite feeling it and didn't have a specific direction in mind. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to push through this. I'm going to give myself some rest. I'm going to let myself enjoy Thanksgiving. And then Monday morning rolls around when I thought, okay, I've got to record the podcast. And the roofers show up to replace our roof. So there was like really loud banging and clicking. And I was just like, oh, I can't record a podcast with all of this going on. And like, there was no getting away from it. I couldn't have taken my setup down to the basement to get away from the roofing sound. It was just so loud and so incessant that here we are on Tuesday night, 2 days late. And you know what? This is human life. This is real life. I am so not perfect, and I'm really working on doing what feels nourishing and good to me in my body as I work through some trauma. And so I'm allowing this episode to be just me talking about some insights and what I have experienced in the last couple of weeks. So every year, as Thanksgiving and Christmas approach, I find myself really withdrawing, like physically withdrawing. Like for years and years, I didn't want to help put up the Christmas tree. I just want to kind of lay in my bed under my warm covers and read and journal and just like not interact with the world. A few years ago, I recognized, this was probably after I started learning about life coaching tools, I recognized that the holidays were a trigger of sadness for me. And, that was actually kind of freeing to realize that. It gave me some perspective, that gave me some space to allow myself to just be who I am and to let it be there and not try to push through and put on the happy face and be productive. And those are the things that I am tempted to tell myself of like, come on, get it together. You can do this. But really, it feels like a couple of months. And honestly, winter in general is like this for me. But I think what I'm realizing more and more is that the arrival of winter coincides with the arrival of the holiday season, at least where I live. And it's all just one big trigger. And I tend to, from a nervous system point of view, go into shutdown into that freeze mode. And so the cold winter, like it's a physical manifestation of how I am actually feeling. And I'm working with a trauma coach right now. And I have a lot of tools now to help me. I'm totally deepening my understanding, and I'm just doing this for me, everyone. Like I, of course, because I'm a coach, if this comes up with my clients, I will do what I can, but I don't feel qualified or experienced enough to really practice this in my coaching right now. I'm just trying to heal myself. And so, a big part of that is listening to my body and not pushing it to be productive or do anything that feels contrary to what just what I'm naturally feeling. Right. So, a lot of this is like processing emotion and just staying on top of the awareness, which is all good and fine. I have never in my entire life allowed myself to not push through. And I've had pretty good success with that, like I graduated valedictorian and I went to college and I graduated in 4 years with a degree and I got pretty much any job I ever wanted that I applied to. I married an amazing man. I had kids, church callings, all those things I have accomplished because I told myself to like push through and you can do it and you can be productive. Well, all that that has done is buffer away or distract me from the trauma and the physical sensations that are happening in my body. And this year has been a year for me of a lot of healing and a lot of deeper understanding of myself. And the biggest work and the hardest work is slowing down and being with myself in the sensation of whatever emotion that I'm in, like truly being with it. It is so hard. If you have ever tried this, you know what I'm talking about. But I want to talk to you about a little bit of an experience I had on a coaching call with my coach. Shout out to Shyla Cash. She is so amazing. Look her up, ShylaCash.com. If you have anything to do with trauma that you want help with, I was on a session with her and I told her that like the holidays really bring up a lot of emotion for me and that it's this deep sadness. And and the other thing I told her was that I had taken the week off from client calls. My business is set up that I do client calls 3 weeks out of a month and then take one off from client calls, but I do Voxer coaching during that week. So I'm still there supporting my clients, even when they don't have a session. And theoretically, it is so that I have both time to rest, but also time to work on creating content and doing some of the tasks in my business that I don't always get to when I have client calls filling up my schedule. And obviously, the best part of my schedule are my client calls. But sometimes I have these ideas of, workbooks that I want to put together or social media content or podcast content, right? Things like that that require some focus and time and attention that I don't always get to. So that is supposed to be what I do on these weeks off. And I also purposely schedule them when my kids are home from school so that I have more flexibility in spending time with them. They generally don't wake up very early because they're typical teenagers. So I try to do my work stuff first thing in the morning and then spend time with them in the afternoon. But what I noticed last week with Thanksgiving was that I just felt like this big blob. And Shyla really had me slow down and be with what does it feel like to be this blob. And I had such a hard time identifying what the sensations in my body were. And I noticed my mind wandering a lot. And she was so gracious and gentle with me. She was just like, okay, well, it seems like you're having a hard time being present today. So let's just pause that, right? This is at least how she is with me. And it was so validating. Like I'm even almost feeling tears come up thinking about how validating that felt for her to be like, and we're just having a hard time being present today. And I was like, oh, yeah, I am having a hard time being present today. My mind is all over the place and I really don't want to sit with this feeling. And, we kind of touched into the feeling and then talked about it a little bit and then touched back into the feeling. And oh my goodness, I was sitting with this feeling of being a blob and really struggling with it, trying to describe what that felt like in my body. And sometimes, I'm sitting, closing my eyes, trying to focus my attention on my body and the sensations, being witnessed by my coach. And I notice myself feeling like I'm doing this wrong. She probably hates this, right? Like having some judgments and not wanting to speak those out loud. And so I actually didn't speak those out loud in the session, but a memory came up for me. And so one thing that I'm learning that you can apply in your life, if you choose to try implementing this, is when you're sitting with the sensations, the goal is not really to change them or move them or have them shift. That's always a good sign because emotion is energy in motion. And when it's in a static state, it usually, represents some kind of trauma or shutdown or freeze response. So we do want those sensations to move and shift, but it's totally fine if they don't. And I had this kind of epiphany moment where I was like, oh, the goal is to stay with the emotion until something shifts or until something comes up. And for me, that is usually a memory. So this memory came up of a Christmas, a specific Christmas where my mom was really upset that my dad didn't want to go get a Christmas tree. I was like 10 or 12 years old. I don't remember the details. I just know that my mom was really upset and it was because we didn't have a Christmas tree. I think it was like Christmas Eve or Christmas Eve. And my mom was crying and very withdrawn. And she was kind of like in that passive aggressive, huffy puffy energy. And I don't know where my sisters were and I don't know where my dad was, but it was like I was standing in the room with her and she had finally decided, well, I'm just going to go cut down a tree. And it was the charliest, browniest tree ever. Just this sad little sapling of a tree. And she was like upset and angry about it, right? Like it wasn't the tree she wanted. And this wasn't the Christmas that she had envisioned. And this tended to come up every year, which is why I think I have holiday trauma. It's always like mom being really upset and huffy puffy and passive aggressive and crying and then dad withdrawing. And I don't know if he just like spent a lot of time outside. I don't know where he is, but I'm here. And one thing I really noticed was that I feel like I was 10 or 12 years old. That's totally coming from my brain. But in the memory, I felt so much smaller than that. I like looking at myself, I would have identified myself in the memory as like 8. But I think it's just because it was a function of the emotions I was feeling watching this dynamic play out and feeling so helpless, feeling so small, feeling so unseen. And I'm sitting here in the coaching session, seeing all of this and describing it to my coach. And she's asking me questions that are helping me process through the emotion. And several weeks ago, she had said, oh, there's some anger and rage going on. And I was like, really? It doesn't feel like that to me. It just feels like this sadness. And she's like, that's okay. Sometimes it just shows up as sadness. But oh my gosh, you guys, now I'm feeling the anger and the rage. And this session is, I think, what broke me open as kind of watching myself as this young child and examining my inner child, my inner 10-year-old, what's going on with my mom and my dad and with me, and what am I feeling and why am I feeling it? And I keep having this sensation in my throat of like, not like nausea or vomiting, but like disgust. That's the feeling. That is the emotion, is disgust. And my coach has explained to me that that often shows up when we're like purging these old patterns, right? And And so tonight, because I've been kind of here in this place with this blob feeling and this disgust and this like sadness, this deep sadness for a couple of weeks now. And I'm trying to not rush out of it, and I'm trying to be with it and trying to just practice bringing myself into my body. My brain really doesn't want to be in my body when the emotions come on and when they feel really strong. But I'm being very diligent about practicing being in my body. And I've just had these waves of sadness and anger. And tonight I was journaling, and I was thinking about, well, what I did is I asked myself, and here's the power of asking yourself really good questions. I asked myself to this disgust feeling, this kind of tension pulling in the back of my throat with like a lump at the bottom of my throat that wants to come up. And I just asked, why are you here? And immediately I felt these words of, you have something to say. And you guys, I've been in this visibility coaching program, visibility medicine, on helping myself become more visible for 6 months almost. And I'm at the very end of this coaching, the 6-month coaching program. And I'm just finally now like really facing my own visibility wounds. And sometimes that's how it happens. Like sometimes it doesn't feel safe to let it come out. And it's just this really slow chipping away, opening the door little by little. And I wouldn't say that there has been a flood opened, but I definitely feel like the door is wider open now with having done some kind of trauma processing work. And so then I asked this kind of inner knowing, I asked, what do I want to say? And it just all came out. And the anger, like true anger toward my mom, so surprised me. My whole life, I thought I was just like her. I thought that I was going to be depressed and helpless and just not rise to my potential because I was so much like my mom. And the last couple of days, as I've sat with these feelings and let myself be with these feelings, I have noticed my brain wanting to go to memories of my dad. And my dad would often stand outside smoking a cigarette. And I don't know how often I did this, but I have memories of at least a few times of going out and standing with him and feeling like I wanted to comfort him, and seeing the dynamic happening between my mom and my dad, and this back and forth of my dad loved my mom so deeply, and she didn't fully return that love. I don't want to say she didn't love him, but she certainly loved him less than he loved her. And they were so busy in this codependent dynamic, looking at each other and wanting validation from each other. My dad would go through a cycle of just loving my mom and really kind of like pampering her the best he could, at least. And then she would get upset or mad about something and he would withdraw. And then I think if I had to guess, my guess is that he felt a lot of loneliness and a lot of shame. And then when he got tired of feeling that way, he would get angry, which is a very acceptable emotion for men to feel, is anger. And he would get angry and then he would explode in emotion. And then my mom would withdraw. She would be the one that would go into this like depressed, melancholy, crying state. And back and forth it went. And I noticed myself, like when I really open up to what do I want to say? What am I feeling? This little girl in me. Sorry, you guys, like I told you, this is raw and unprocessed. So I hope it helps somebody out there. I feel angry now, and I finally feel like I have permission to be angry. And my whole life, it has just manifested as sadness, just deep, deep sadness. And now I can see how I'm actually more like my dad in that deep love and withdrawing and then anger, except that I never allowed myself to really feel the anger, which tends to be an unacceptable emotion for women to display. But now I feel permission to feel the anger, and I'm pretty angry at my mom. And I'm trying to not judge myself for that. Yeah, I'm just trying to let it flow and let it be there. And I know that even though it's really uncomfortable, that once I do let it out and let it flow, that it will be really healing for me. But I just want you to know that it is not easy. It's not easy to let myself feel angry. And yeah, especially anger toward my mom. I think there's an element here that she has passed away and she can't somehow defend herself, even though I think if she was alive, I wouldn't actually tell her any of this. But it feels somehow unfair to her to feel angry toward her when she's not here and she can't give a rebuttal. She can't explain. But I'm trying to keep myself in the space of like, this is just what's coming up for you, and just feel all of these feelings, and it's totally okay. So that's where I am with the holidays and my own trauma, which is really, I just see this as like my pattern of shutting down, of wanting to escape the feelings that I feel. And the pattern really is, let's just get numb. And what it shows up for me is, sorry, this is like fabulous English, huh? It shows up in these holiday weeks as a desperate desire to be productive. And even if I've set aside time from my business to rest or to take a break or to kind of shift in energy, my brain is like, we should clean out a closet. We should, do some deep cleaning that we don't usually get to. We should do this. We should do that. It's like this urgency, this urge to do anything but just sit and be, which the sitting and the being is where all the feelings come up, right? So again, part of the reason why this episode is a couple of days late is because I forced myself to not push through and to just sit and be. And I felt it when I was like, oh, I know what I'm going to talk about. I think I actually have known for a few days, but it felt scary and vulnerable. So my brain started searching for other things that I could talk about because I have so many ideas. So I know that that's not the excuse, but I think it's so fascinating that my kind of default is to like, let's do a lot of things. Let's do. And the antidote to that is to just take, expansive amounts of space and time to be compassionate and gentle with myself. So I hope that helps you. I definitely feel the question of like, who am I to be talking about this or even attempting to help anyone in this way? And so I'm very much leaning on the name of the podcast, Why Not Me? So I do appreciate any feedback if you have questions or, anything, any kind of correspondence that you want to have around this conversation. I am more than open to do that. But that's enough for now. And so are you. Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this episode made you think of yourself in a new way, would you please give it a rating and a review? And if you want to truly do the work of being the best you at what you do, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free session. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.